Hello and welcome to the first episode of Fashion Elements. Today we will be talking about the impact that the international system has on the fashion industry. Of course, we'll also be talking about how the pandemic has shaped the industry, and also whether some of the changes will remain after the pandemic ends. Another topic we will be covering are some new developing markets that could become quite interesting for the fashion industry in the near future. Today with us we have Sandile Hlophe, who is a partner at EY and as a member of the Africa region leadership team. We have Malte Kaeding, who is a senior lecturer in international politics at the University of Surrey. We have Filippo Prini, who's a project leader at Boston Consulting. And we have Danilo Taino, who's a series correspondent, senior correspondent and columnist at Corriere della Sera. Now, our first guest today is Dr. Kaeding. He will talk to us about the impact that the international system has on production. So if everyone is ready, I would leave it to Dr. Kaeding.
Right, so I'm going to talk about how geopolitics influences industry production and markets. So in the international political economy, there's the literary textbook example, which illustrates this commodity chain of neoliberal economic trade order and the relation between production and market, and that's always the life of a t-shirt. So that's my link here to fashion. More importantly, the journey from cotton growing in the US, manufacturing in China, and then again sales in the US or Europe, and eventual donation maybe to a developing country in Asia or Africa shows the nature of the global economy as we know it. And the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the weaknesses of this neoliberal consensus. So the international political economy of production has become a heated topic, a heated political issue. And COVID-19 is actually only one of the challenges to the development of the global economy. So we have questions about sustainability in a time of climate change crisis, the relationship between production and social reproduction or migrations or others. And of course, the prospects of rapid automatization raises really important issues on work organization and labor rights. Some of these actually, I think, have been foreshadowed already by the pandemic. So the liberal approach is to some extent almost discredited by the realities of these challenges. And the question is, if we now see maybe a return towards a more mercantilist approach in policies. So some of these were actually promoted by the Trump administration, but not only there are also some indications that in Europe production is coming closer back home. These debates we have seen, for example, talks about digital sovereignty, state-led green energy, innovation, and the return of some of these overseas production lines. And of course, among all this, the threat of China always looms, but I'm sure that Mr. Taino will talk about this much more later. So I go back to the international political economy, and Susan Strange argues that the international political economy is based on four foundations or structures: production and trade, money and finance, security, and knowledge and technology. And I want to focus a little bit on production. So who produces what, for whom, and on what terms? This is really at the heart of the international political economy. So when you remember these big geopolitical changes, such as the fall of the Iron Curtain, the collapse of the Soviet Union, how this contributed then to changes in the international trade rules. So the consequences have been a shift of production to new emerging economies in Eastern Europe, for example, Latin America, and of course, most importantly, in Asia. So governments in these countries, of course, always try to attract FDI, so foreign direct investments. And in Western countries, on the other hand, we see on the domestic level then maybe unions, but also manufacturers lobbying their own governments for more protectionist barriers against cheap imports, for example, from China in order to preserve jobs there. So here you can see a link back or potential link back to the international level again, when governments might attempt to bring about change on the international level through organizations like the WTO again. And I think the most obvious link between geopolitics and production and markets is, of course, in extractive industries. Maybe a couple of years, you remember the debates about rare earth and how they're all linked, located in China, and what will happen if there's any conflict between China and other countries, or of course oil production. Yeah? So this is a commodity concentrated in so few countries that each time there's a political crisis, this will hit production and markets in various forms. And often these production fluctuations are linked to international sanctions, like in the case of Venezuela or in the Middle East, for example. So one of the most, talking about sanctions, I think one of the most interesting cases to study is, of course, the US-China trade war and the role sanctions have played there. Maybe you remember that the US has, by citing security concerns about the close relationship between Huawei, the telecommunication company, and the Chinese state, plus Iran sanctions violation, had added Huawei to this entity list. So this meant also having a ripple-on effect on European partners, treatment of Huawei as access to the US markets for the Europeans and access to security information by the US would be impacted if Huawei would have been allowed into critical infrastructure, communication infrastructure in Europe. So for Huawei, this actually destroyed their global supply chain, with key US suppliers now stopping to provide chips for them, as well as Taiwanese chip makers as well, stopping the supply. And if we look at the profit side, who benefits from this? Of course, the first example is Samsung, of course, as Huawei is a big competitor in the mobile phone sector, but also as a country, Taiwan. So Taiwan did announce its own 5G chip production cooperation with Nokia and further production in this area last year, and is also investing heavily into research and development, AI, 5G, to provide secure technology for the US and European markets. So in some form, Taiwan directly benefits economically from this increasing geopolitical confrontation between China and Western countries. But of course, when we talk about Taiwan, we have to remember that China is just next door. So security-wise, it doesn't profit from these heightened tensions. And of course, both economies, Chinese and Taiwanese, are heavily integrated. But why I talk about China and Taiwan is because this also offers, I think, a glimpse into the link again between geopolitics and production, where we look at COVID-19 and the impact of the pandemic. So as you know, Taiwan is one of the few countries who is domestically very little affected by COVID-19. So things are actually going on as almost as normal as before, thanks to a very early and very strict countermeasures. So that meant that while other Asian countries, their economies suffered quite significantly in the first half of 2020, with growth rates dropping between 7.7 in China percent and 11.2 in South Korea, Taiwan actually maintained an average growth rate of 1.5% during the same time. And overall, it had outpaced China in growth last year. So we can, and I will end with this, we can therefore understand why the Chinese government has pushed for an opening of the economy and an early return of almost normal production in early summer last year already. Maybe you remember that they opened all these factories, switching on the light, nobody was there, but they wanted to send this message, we're again open for business. And since August 2020, actually, China has been starting its vaccination program. So they started vaccinating people, firstly, those who travel for business overseas to keep the connections to raw material suppliers and key markets, especially in Africa. So the willingness to go ahead with this vaccine, a vaccine that might not really fulfill the efficiency and safety requirements we're used to, illustrates really that the assumed advantages of this, going ahead with this vaccine, are worth the risk for the Chinese government to take. And I think it remains to be seen how this approach will then affect global politics and the global economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kaeding. So I think now that we've understood why international politics is important to consider when looking at any industry, really, I would like to invite Danilo Taino, who's a senior correspondent from Corriere della Sera and an expert in international politics and global economics. And I wanted to give a picture of what the international system and the world look like right now. So Danilo, I think because we've closed with China, I think we should start with China. So what in your view, this sort of Cold War between China and the United States, who's going to win, and did the pandemic change sort of the outcome of this Cold War?
Hello, Margherita. Thank you for having me here. I think that we cannot say that there will be a winner in this situation. I think that both China and the United States are coming out of the pandemic, if they're coming out of the pandemic, weaker than before, with a weaker standing in the international arena. I think that China has to pay the price of not being transparent in the situation, and particularly at the beginning of the pandemic, in the situation in Wuhan. And the United States are paying the prices of deciding not to lead the world. Usually the United States were the leaders of the world in the big crisis. It's been so in Africa, it's been so in Southeast Asia with the tsunami a few years ago. This time, the United States wasn't there. Trump administration decided that the America first was the mantra of the administration. So they decided not to engage in an international effort to deal with the pandemic. So I think that both China and the United States will pay a price for this in their international standing. There are also other countries on the other side that have done very well or quite well in managing the pandemic. I think to Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, a few countries in Europe maybe. So I think that these countries will think that you can live well without being too close to the two big superpowers. And I think that probably in this situation, a future of not a bipolar future, but a multipolar future is thinkable.
Right, that's quite interesting because, of course, the pandemic has definitely changed. The whole international order, and it's kind of interesting to think that had that not happened, we might be in a very, your comment would be maybe very different. Still talking about China, I think it's worth to mention, of course, China is very efficient, and this derives also from an intense government control. Recently, we've seen Jack Ma, who's the founder of Alibaba and Alipay, being investigated after making comments about the Communist Party. Now, in the long run, is this intense government control that is now, making China so efficient going to be an issue? Because, freedom of speech is kind of what characterizes capitalism, and everyone says capitalism leads to it, to more freedoms. So is this gonna end up hurting China in the long run?
I think that the government, the Chinese government personnel is quite solid, and they also have good skills. This is absolutely true. But we also have some problems in China, I think. And the first one is that the corruption is very widespread. And when you have a state-controlled economy, the corruption is going to be widespread and will be widespread. And this will be a problem also in the future. It's been a problem in the past, and it will be a problem also in the future. And second, you can be an extraordinary bureaucrat, but you cannot guess which innovations will be the future innovations. I don't think that a bureaucrat could have thought of the smartphone, for example. To be innovative, you need an environment favorable to innovation. You need venture capital. You need a strong financial system, and particularly you need an open society, and you need the freedom of thinking and discussing and choosing what to do. When there is a bureaucrat of the Communist Party that decides what the innovation will be, I think that you are not going to have great and real innovations. China has been very, very good in catching up with other countries. I think that they are investing a lot of money in science, in research, but I think that if you don't have the freedom of choosing what to do, and if you must leave the decisions to the government or to the party, I think that you will have a big problems. I think that China has an extraordinary economy, not because it is a centralized power, but because they opened up the markets with Deng Xiaoping at the end of the 70s and in the 80s, and they freed the energies that in the country were present. But the reason is the opening up of China that has made the country strong.
Okay, so of course, we're talking about China opening up, but in the last probably 5 to 6 years, we've seen some nationalist approaches to international relations. So we've seen, of course, Brexit, that came into place a couple of weeks ago, and Trump's policies of putting tariffs on China, and the whole America First policy. So why is globalization feared by countries that like China did? They really benefited from globalization. So why is it now feared? And can it really be slowed down, or is there actually just no point in trying to have more nationalist approaches?
But I think that globalization is already retreating in some way, in many ways. There is a political backlash in Western countries, in particular, and by the people who didn't benefit from globalization. This is a reality both in Europe and in the United States. And I think that the populist vote is in part, at least, dependent of this perception of globalization. Probably the reasons are also different, because technology is one of the big reasons for this backlash. But in any case, for sure, globalization is not loved by a big chunk of the Western population. And the pandemic is also destroying parts of the veins of globalization, and particularly the value chains and the supply chains that are the global skeleton of the global manufacturing. And the global manufacturing is working around that. I think will be a problem probably also for the fashion industry, I suppose. So also this element is going to destroy parts of the globalization. And then there is the conflict between the United States and China that is developing, it was developing with the Trump administration, at least, in the direction of a possible decoupling of the business environment of the United States and the business environment linked to China. So this is a possibility still now, also with the new American administration. But I think that, yes, I think that the globalization is retreating and probably will retreat more in the next few years. There are a number of things that a number of policies that can be developed in order to deal with this situation. But right now, I think that a big number of countries are answering to this situation and to the populist surge with more nationalistic policies.
Okay, so in terms of, we're talking about the new administration in the United States, which came to be in a very non-peaceful way. We've seen the attack to the Capitol, and suddenly, you know, various millions of people did still vote for Donald Trump. So sort of what's happening there? What is going to happen? And, you know, of course, now the Democrats in the United States have both the House, Senate, and of course the presidency. How hard is it going to be for the new administration to implement serious reform? And will they actually implement serious reform that will facilitate trade, and that also will sort of make the United States be, you know, more loved, I guess, in the international system? Because we've seen, of course, this summer a lot of protests, and during the past 4 years, we can't say that, you know, Europe wasn't worried about what the politics in the United States were.
I think that this is an Obamian administration for the personnel that is entering it. A lot of people were linked to the Obama administration 4 years ago and before that. I think that since the end of the Cold War, America has been without a serious, coherent foreign policy. And in the last 12 years, I think that the retreat of America from the international affairs has been quite pronounced because of the backseat approach of Obama and because of Trump's America First. So this puts, I think, Biden in a difficult situation, but also he has a number of problems, domestic problems, that he has to deal with first. We have the pandemic, we have the vaccine campaign, there is the economy that is not in a perfect shape, there are the racial issues, and the political divisions within the country. So I think that the biggest problems now from the Biden administration will be this. I don't know how the reforms will be. I think that probably United States needs a number of reforms, internal reforms, but it depends in which direction Biden will drive and how much he will drive this necessity. From an international point of view, I worried quite a lot from the absence of the United States on the international stage. I think this is dangerous and this is risky because of possible wars. When the United States are not there, there are a number of strong men in the world that could try to gain some advantages. I'm thinking to Xi Jinping, I'm thinking to Putin, to Erdogan, to Al-Sisi in Egypt, to the Ayatollahs in Iran. So I think that the situation could be quite dangerous for Europe and for the world, for the absence of the United States from the international stage. I think that the paramount issue for the administration will be China, of course, the relation. Here there is probably a bipartisan consensus to contain China. There will be differences between the Trump administration and Biden administration. Maybe Chinese government, Xi Jinping and Biden will speak and will develop some sort of deals on climate change. But in general, I think that the United States will be quite strongly opposed to the emergence of a Chinese hegemony. We will see also some movements probably in Southern America, in Venezuela, and maybe Cuba. We must remember that the new, the new Secretary of State has been the person sent by Obama to open up the relationship between the United States and Cuba a few years ago. So I think that probably a new initiative from Washington will be taken towards Cuba. And then there is the issue of Iran, of the nuclear program in Iran that will be dealt by the administration. But I think that the paramount issue will be China, of course.
So many questions that we could ask there and expand on so many topics, but we don't have a lot of time left. So of course, I think we must speak about Brexit, because we've seen some effects of Brexit already. Some are negative, but also we can argue that with the whole issue about on the vaccines that he's seeing the European Union. I suppose that's definitely something that leaving the European Union in that sense definitely benefited the UK. Now, what can happen there? What would the best scenario be for the United Kingdom? Who should they be sort of speaking with right now? And how is Brexit going to affect Europe, and how is Brexit going to affect the United Kingdom in the short and in the long term?
I will try to be very quick. I think it is very sad that Britain is not in the European Union anymore. I loved Britain in Europe, and I think that the role of Britain was really important for shaping the policies within the European Union. And I think that without Britain, the EU will suffer quite a lot, particularly in opening up the markets. I think that probably Europe will be in a worse situation than before now. Also, the dynamics within the European Union have changed very much for the absence of London there. What about Britain? I think that everything depends by the approach of this government and the Johnson's government and the next governments. If Britain will be open, I think it will manage in some way to substitute and to develop a new substitute Europe, I mean, at least in part. And the price to pay would be quite high in economic terms, but I think that the choice was a political choice for the majority of the British people. So the issue is dealt now, and I think that the difference will be done by a nationalist government or an internationalist government. And it is not only a question of having free trade agreements with other countries or with other regions that are important, but also to give the impression or not that the country is open for business and the country is attractive. Last week, I tried to send a box to my daughter that lives in London, and the box returned because of custom regulations that I didn't know nothing about this. And that's a problem. And I think that in general, there is a problem in Europe, at least, for understanding how much Britain will be open in the next few years. I think also that the approach of Britain to, for example, the students will be a sort of acid test to understand how much Britain wants to remain attractive, because it has been very much attractive for Europeans, but not only for Europeans in the last few years. So I think that the country will have a few problems. It will have also a lot of opportunities if the country remains open, internationalist, and not mercantilist. Just to cite the professor that spoke before. In the end, I don't think that Scotland will leave the United Kingdom. It's too costly.
Well, thank you very much, Danilo. It was very interesting, and again, there would be so many more questions that we could ask there. But now I want to move to another part of the world that we haven't really spoken about, and we don't really speak about, but I think we need to start considering it, especially after this pandemic. Our next speaker is Sandile Hlophe. He's a business transformation strategy and transaction advisory partner at EY. And a member of the Africa region leadership team and the market segment leader for the government and infrastructure. Sandile is going to talk to us about the growth in Africa and whether the continent can become an attractive market for the luxury sector. So Sandile, please.
Thank you. So today my topic is going to focus on the question, can Africa become a substantial market for luxury goods? And if so, what are governments in Africa doing that will facilitate this shift? But more importantly, what should investors consider when seeking to invest in the luxury goods market in Africa? So to begin my talk, what is the size of the African market, and more importantly, the size of the luxury goods market within the African continent? Almost 60% of Africa's population in 2019 was under the age of 25, making Africa the most youngest continent. And in addition, in that same year, more than 1/3 of the African population was aged between 15 to 34 years. And it is projected that by 2100, Africa's youth population could be equivalent to twice that of the entire Europe population. This is the Africa investment business case, as it presents access to the largest consumer base over the next 10 to 30 years globally. Africa's robust economic growth and booming population has given rise to an ever-expanding affluent class that underpins the growth and demand for luxury goods on the continent. And according to the Mauritius-based Afrasia Bank's Africa Wealth Report of 2019, the total individual wealth held on the continent amounted to 2.2 trillion US dollars, with around 148,000 high net worth individuals on the continent, which wealth is expected to rise by 35% over the next 9 years to reach over 3 trillion US dollars by 2027. You may ask, which key countries are these high net worth individuals resident in? So currently, South Africa has 39,200 high net worth individuals, followed by Egypt with 16,700 high net worth individuals, Nigeria at 9,900, Kenya at 8,600, Morocco at 4,600, which hopefully gives you a sense of which are the key countries and markets where there is a high concentration of high net worth individuals on the continent. The African luxury goods items that are consumed by these high net worth individuals typically are vehicles, clothing and accessories, watches, private jets, and yachts, which consumption of these goods generated 6.1 billion US dollars of revenue in 2018. This number is expected to increase exponentially, with Africa currently the world's second fastest growing region when it comes to the consumption of luxury goods, trailing only the Middle East in terms of luxury goods consumption. With that background, one would ask, so what are governments in Africa doing to enable trade and the import of these luxury goods? The recently established African Continental Free Trade Area is a strategic framework for delivering on Africa's goal for inclusive and sustainable development, and is a concrete manifestation of the Pan-African drive for inclusive economic growth. The agreement initially requires member countries to remove tariffs from 90% of goods and services traded in those countries to enable free access to commodities, goods, and services across the continent. The United Nations Economic Commission for Africa estimates that this agreement will boost intra-African trade by 52% in the year 2022. And interestingly, Africa's main goods trading partner is the European Union. Africa exports out of the continent. Their first main export partner is the EU, closely followed by other African countries. So there's already quite a lot of intra-Africa trade. And then in third place, further Africa at 16% of that quantum. And then in third place is China. So Africa is beginning to export quite a bit of their goods to China. When it comes to imports into the continent, the EU leads again significantly as being a big part of where goods are imported into Africa from. This is followed by China at 16% imports into Africa. And then again, imports from within Africa, from other African countries, makes up 13% of the imports on the continent. Thus, the European Union, China, and African countries are well positioned to take advantage of the African Continental Free Trade Area to increase trade on the continent and in the luxury goods sector. So finally, what should investors consider when seeking to invest in the luxury goods market in Africa? Africa needs connectors. And by this, I mean investors who are able to work across multiple countries in Africa, particularly across the regional country clusters of West Africa, East Africa, and Southern Africa. As these countries are already well connected, with this connection expected to accelerate even more with the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. We have seen Africa trade barriers continue to fall at an accelerated pace, and intra-African trade holds enormous potential. From a customer-based needs perspective, we've seen Africa consumers' needs change, and customers in Africa are increasingly adopting digital social media and online shopping platforms, which presents an exponentially increasing market for the advertisement and selling of luxury goods. Thus, in conclusion, Africa has already become a substantial market for luxury goods. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandile. So our next guest is Filippo Prini, who is a project leader at Boston Consulting and a core member of the fashion and luxury practice. And now I want to actually talk about fashion specifically with someone who works in fashion specifically now. So Filippo, first of all, can we have an overview of the fashion industry as a whole? Sort of how much revenue does it generate? And also the fashion industry generates a lot of jobs. So can we talk about that a little bit, please?
Sure. So I think when looking at a bit of the numbers of let's say the fashion and luxury industry as a whole, we need to really think about to use a three time horizon lenses. So everything that was before 2019 and before, so the last let's say 10 years ending in 19, then what happened in 1920, and then hopefully what will happen in the next couple of years. If we look at the overall size in terms of euro values or dollar values, we have roughly, let's say, a fashion luxury industry that is in the $1,000 billion range in 19. This, especially when looking at the luxury part, it's not just a personal, let's say, item, but it's also made of experiential goods. So everything that is not particularly related to the personal, let's say, purchases. And the last 10 years have looked at the fashion and luxury industry growing quite significantly at CAGR, ranging from 4 to 8%, depending on how you cut these figures. Then COVID happened last year, and a massive drop was experienced by this industry that honestly, maybe after a few others, such as travel and tourism, was one of the most affected one, given that stores were closed, and one of those, and it was one of those goods that that was more quickly replaced by others. And here we are talking about a drop of year on year that has been quite unprecedented, and ranging from 20 to 30% ranges for everything that is personal goods, so clothes and such, to even ranges from 40 to 60% that everything that is experiential, so from skincares and many others items that or experiences that fall into that group. And then luckily we have seen that the recovery time that is expected for many of these falls are quite different when looking at a geographical level. So countries are reacting very differently. We all know how China quickly reacted to this drop, and actually is ended the year at par level. Other countries such as Italy, UK, France, I mean, they're experienced, a fall whose bad results will be mitigated not before end of next year. So it's from a number perspective, unfortunately, it's not a very happy moment, and from a job perspective, if that was your second part of the question, yes, for sure, the fashion and luxury industry gives a lot of, impacts a lot the occupation of these countries that we just talked about. With stores being closed, continuous lockdowns, uncertainty on whether or not there will be another lockdown, and I'm specifically talking about the European countries. Companies are very scared of continuing their developing of their footprint, and therefore a lot of jobs are being lost, and I don't expect this trend to change in the immediate next future.
Thank you. Now, of course, COVID has negatively impacted the fashion industry, but it also has changed the fashion industry. We've seen an increase in technology, changes in the way that technology is used. And also, I assume some countries that maybe were not ready for that technological change, they had to dive into it because they had no other choice. Now, what structural changes in both consumers and companies are expected to remain after the pandemic?
Yeah, so I think this is a very interesting question to look at, because if we talk about negative impacts, there are some. We must also look at the bright side, and here there are some quite good impacts on an industry that has been more resilient, especially in some countries such as the Western European one, France, Italy, Spain, that have been historically more resilient to let's say a digital adoption, so e-commerce adoption of from a consumer behavioral point of view. So if I think about the impacts that this is having, so the lack of tourism, so people traveling significantly less and purchasing significantly less outside of their home countries, and this is very heavily driven if we segregated and look only at the luxury fashion and luxury segment, where Chinese make 50% of the market when traveling abroad. Of course, it pushed companies to rethink their local approach and their local product offering. So I think one of the structural changes we've seen is that if the last 20 years have been a continuous push towards a globalization of your product offering, meaning people could find in any specific stores of their brand, of their favorite brand, pretty much a very similar assortment and prices throughout the world. So I think this is definitely changing. Brands are creating a more local, let's say, product offering to accommodate the needs of the various countries or regions. So probably what you will find in the assortment that you will find now in the next few months and years in China will be different than the one in some European countries, and it will be different from the one you find in the US. So to me, this is the first big change. The second change, I think that is worth mentioning, and it's the e-com adoption. Fashion brands were already moving towards that direction, while luxury brands have always been very adverse and lacking behind in terms of providing this kind of offering to their clients, leveraging the digital channels, both proprietary channels such as the brand.com, but also third parties or marketplaces, for example. What this means is, of course, to enhance this digital adoption, you need to a bit review your sort of a go-to-market model with your consumers. And one of the trends that we have seen at BCG and we've seen a lot of brands investing time, money, and resources in it is, for example, the virtual engagement of their audience. What I mean by virtual engagement is that, so a little bit leveraging store personnel that is not working or is working significantly less than with regular foot traffic. They're offering sort of streaming and virtual shopping experience to their loyal customers, or creating virtual content that that consumers can access. So presenting, for example, new products online, engaging CRM customers online with private or group online sessions. And more broadly, for example, another trend that goes into that direction is for sure the gamification of the shopping experience. We have seen that many brands, both fashion and luxury, have created and entered like through video games to engage audiences in this new digital ecosystem. And I think this is impacting also the way brands should think their internal organization, because you will need more and more digital capabilities, and as we know, the digital go-to-market is significantly different than let's say a retail traditional go-to-market.
Right, thank you. Now, I think to go back on the politics a little bit, again, I think we need to consider Brexit again. So what impact will Brexit have on the fashion industry, both global and in the UK? Because British brands tend to be smaller, they tend to be very innovative and younger designers, but they are smaller. So maybe sort of tariffs that a bigger brand could just sort of overlook, will they really impact the British fashion industry?
Yeah, so this is another big question that, of course, nobody has a crystal ball to know what's going to happen with this unprecedented change. I have to echo the words that I've been said a few minutes ago, that it is really a pity seeing this UK exiting Europe, and from our point of view, this will have negative impacts on large brands, but especially, as you said, on smaller brands. So to answer your question, I think from one point of view, many so the larger brands are kind of creating task forces within their organization to understand a bit better and try to prevent as much as possible the negative impacts that Brexit will have, specifically on the implication on flow of goods, taxes, duties, warehouses set up, the deliveries of e-commerce, for example, we just talked about, from UK to EU mainland. But from a certain point of view, I mean, once again, having a large monetary power helps you some sort of creating ad hoc functions within an organization to deal with this. What's sure is that, of course, there will be a lack of talent. We know that when you close the borders or you reduce the flow of borders, you reduce the number of talents you can recruit. And this is true for large brands, and this is true for small brands. One thing that furthermore, that I believe will have a negative impact on both sized, let's say, type of brands, is that, you know, especially when thinking about, let's say, tourism generating a lot of revenues when shopping in the UK, the fact that UK is exiting Europe, this will prevent to offer tax-free shopping. And tax-free shopping, we know that, especially in the last 10 years, has been one of growing significantly He's been one of the key driver for purchases abroad, I think this will furthermore impact the negative impacts that this industry is experiencing. So, you know, first you have the COVID-19 travel restriction. Then you have Brexit, and now you also you also lose the incentives of tax-free shopping. So those three things combined is quite a big limit to tourists' flows and their shopping powers on the UK floor. So unfortunately, on this, I think I really cannot see any positive impacts from this decision and Brexit.
Okay, that is very interesting. Now, I want to move about and talk about young consumers specifically. Of course, we've seen consumers being young people being very interested in a company's sustainability policies, but we talk about it strictly in terms of the environment. However, this year, last year especially, we've seen a lot of social movements that were led by young people. Now, is having sort of progressive political views and is being vocal about them beneficial for a brand? Not that it has to be done just for sort of marketing purposes, but do young consumers actually pay attention to what a brand says about certain social issues?
Sure. So on a among the many the main study BCG publishes yearly, the BCG and Alta Gamma consumer report, where we interview 12,000 more fashion and luxury respondents, tells us that 50+% of these 12,000 people, fashion addicted, say that sustainability is more than ever likely to impact their purchases than it used to do before. And to your point, this is on an average across all age groups. When you look at specific younger ages, so from Generation Z to millennials, that 50 closely becomes, it's closer to 100. What this means is that now more than ever, consumers are paying a lot of attention on luxury and fashion brands' purpose and contribution to society. So it goes well beyond the traditional, let's say, meaning of sustainability that was focusing only on environmental and animal welfare. They care about the environmental causes such as climate change, and actually they take that into consideration throughout their purchases. They want their brands, they expect their brands to have evolved towards a holistic view of sustainability on a 360 degrees and want purpose and responsibility from their brand. So I think COVID-19 also helped brands to kind of a little bit refocus on that, given that, you know, with closed markets, they had the time also to act on it. I mean, if you looked at the larger groups, now all of them have within one of their, let's say, core functions, let's say a sustainability team dedicated to making sure that production, that there is, also from a communicational point of view, that there is purpose in what they are doing. And I believe that this is partially because of, you know, their agendas, but I have to admit that in the last years, younger generations have really shifted their purchases from brands that were not embracing fully this sustainability and this, let's say, responsibility theme towards brand that they were communicating, that they were doing something actively for it. And at the end, I think those brands that moved earlier on will be able to collect gains in the very short term, and at the end will attract, will make these consumers loyal, considering their the fact that younger generation, of course, have a higher lifetime value than older generations.
Right, thank you very much. Now we're coming to the end of our talk, and I see we have Sandile here, and of course Filippo Prini. Now I just wanted to sort of get a comment from you about, again, sort of the younger generation, because of course this is done by a university. Just in terms of how you see sort of how you see us behaving, and how you see us having an impact in the world.
Thanks, Marita.
Yeah, Sandile.
I think the youth and young people are very important in shaping the future of work, how we do going forward, because more and more of the working population coming into new jobs is young people. And as EY, we're a big recruiter of graduates into our internship program. So each year we have seen a big shift intake of that. So what young people have done, they are beginning to shape, I think, as Filippo was saying, the focus on social issues, such as reducing your carbon emissions, social issues focusing on social justice to ensure that your brand resonates with your purpose. And we have seen more and more young people seeking to join organizations or purchase products from organizations that live up to their purpose.
Filippo Prini, if you have a comment on that as well.
Yes. So I can echo really what Sandile mentioned. Also at at BCG, if you consider that we are starting to engage all our next generation of consultants from high schools, creating ad hoc programs for them. We strongly believe that the new generations, the Generation Z, is now more than ever driven by this purpose, much more than our generations, if we have to be honest. And the fashion and specifically on the fashion industry, you see younger people rising to higher positions much sooner than in the past. And this is a bit of a demonstration of how much they are important and how much they are driving the purpose for their organization. So we are. Yeah, it's definitely something to invest in from the very early age, from high schools to throughout the whole, let's say, university processes.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you, of course, for everyone who's attended this event. I wanted just to thank the guys at the Stag who produced this event with me. So we have Francis Cousins, who's done all the IT for the event, and then Pete Ferguson, Yasmin Norville, and Charlotte West. Of course, I wanted to thank our speakers, Sandile, Hlophe, Malte, Kaeding, Filippo Prini, and Danilo Taino, who've taken the time to join us today. If you missed anything or wanted to have a look again, all the interviews and speeches will be available on YouTube. And of course, Fashion Elements was born as a series, so we will do many more of these events. The next one will be on identity. Yeah, keep your eyes open for the date for the next one, which will be available on the Stag and on That Ideas social media. Thank you everyone for coming.